Hey guys, Darren back again for 2018. I'm going to start off with a video that has been requested quite a lot on the channel. People message me and contact me all the time for this one, so I thought I'd just do it. It's a tools of the trade, what you need to get started sort of video. Most of this stuff is pretty obvious, basic tools and soldering equipment and stuff, but I'll show you what I've actually got, how cheap my stuff is, and what you need to get started. So I'll give you a quick pan around and then I'll go through each item. So believe it or not, the very first step is actually the screen up here. I wanted to show you my screens because I use this particular one in front of me for testing. Now what's good about this one, it accepts pretty much all the inputs you can throw at it. Let's go through them. So on the input source down there, we've got composite video, component video, HDMI, DisplayPort, 2 DVIs, VGA, and of course audio. So the reason I like that is because this generation of monitor just had them all and you can just throw any signal at it and it just works. So from a testing perspective, I think an older monitor like this is invaluable. This particular one is a 27-inch IPS display, a Dell U2711. I've mentioned that on other videos, but I'll post another link to that if you like in the description. I don't think you can buy this one anymore, but I'm sure you can find one similar. It accepts 240p over composite, so I do most of my testing just on composite video just to see if the console works. These sort of ugly looking cables hanging out, that's a composite feed that I've manually extended from the back and some audio inputs. That's my go-to, so I'll grab a console, I'll just plug a basic cable into it, I'll plug it in, I'll flick it to composite, and I'll just see if it works. And that's what I really like about this monitor. So get yourself an easy way to test. The other two monitors, they're not really relevant. Okay, so then coming back down from the monitor, I'll just put you up on the stand here and we'll run through a few things. So that's just the microphone stand down there. That's not too exciting. But if you're wondering, it's a Blue Yeti with a pop filter in front of it. So that's what I use to record. And I just film on an iPhone 7 at the moment because I really like how simple it is, and the autofocus can zoom in and out almost seamlessly. I can put anything in front of the screen and you'll get a focus on that. I can show you things and it's just so fast. So I can't really complain, I should probably upgrade to a better camera, but when something works so well, you kind of don't. Right, so on to the disassembly. You get a console, you plug it in, it does or doesn't work from a basic testing perspective. Then you put it on the bench. I do have a soft sort of rubber mat here that I roll out just to protect consoles and also to give you something to look at on camera, but that's not necessary. It's just a basic bench underneath. The disassembly, you're gonna need some basic screwdrivers. I just use household Stanley screwdrivers. These are my go-to screwdrivers for around my house. I do a lot of home handyman sort of stuff. I like these rounder grips because they're really good to hold, and this one comes with free paint. They get used a lot. Like all good tools get used, and when they wear out you just replace them. So I would recommend a basic set like that. I've got the full set obviously, and I'd recommend a game bit screwdriver. So you need a 3.8 and a 4.5 millimeter game bit with an appropriate handle to get inside consoles and into the back of cartridges. On the screwdriver topic in general, if you haven't got anything, I just recommend picking up a generic, like Stanley or a set like that for the house, because you can use it on everything. But if you want to be very specific and get into consoles specifically, I would probably get a Japanese set called the JIS series, which is the Japanese Industrial Standard, I think that stands for, JIS. I'll post a link for those as well because they actually have different tip sizes. This is a Phillips head design. But JIS is actually a whole different type of screw, and most of the Japanese consoles we work with are actually JIS. So these work fine, but that's something to be aware of. If you want to be pedantic about it, get JIS. Okay, so disassembly is pretty straightforward. Something that helps me with disassembly are kits like this. So just these basic, JIS screwdriver sets and that sort of thing. You've got everything from tweezers to unusual Torx bits. You've got plastic tools to help you remove components and just not damage the board because they're made of plastic. There was actually another one along there. I think it's called a spudger. I've lost that one. Probably need to replace it. This metal spatula thing has actually been invaluable. I've used that quite a lot. So, I'd recommend you pick up one of those. This is just another basic Chinese one. It does work really well, but what's important is you get yourself a really good set of tweezers, because tweezers you'll use to manipulate wires and just do small delicate work. They all do come shipped with a set of tweezers, but I actually bought these ones specifically because they're a little bit stronger, they're a little bit shorter, and a bit more precise. That's up to you. I definitely recommend getting these sort of toolkits. They just have everything you sort of need in one sort of pack. So I'll find the best pack going today and I'll post a link to that. These things are like, $20-30 for a basic one. So I'd recommend that. Now, to keep yourself organized, the next thing I do is I have a basic plastic container and I separate all my pieces out. So it sounds obvious, right? But these screws are sort of leftover screws from consoles that didn't make it. There's a lot that don't make it, and there's a lot that I just use for parts, or I buy them for parts only. So I separate them out. And even if I've got projects or things on the go, I tend to keep everything separated. And if you need another screw for a master system, well, there it is. If you need a specific type of piece, you generally have it. So basic stickers and keep yourself organized. I think that's a huge tip, because nothing worse than losing track of things. Okay, so once you're inside the console, one of the most important things you need to have in your toolkit is some isopropyl alcohol. You can buy this in a spray can like I do, or you can buy it as a bottle and just pour some into the lid. But it doesn't really matter. As long as it's nice and highly concentrated isopropyl alcohol, it's a great cleaning, it's a solvent. Pretty much they're the positives about the product. It's exactly what you need. And a real world example is, when you're testing out your console with a basic game, you clean the contacts with isopropyl and just give them a really good clean and rub down before you insert it into the console. And that just, gives you the best chance of testing things properly and getting them working. So clean carts, clean the cartridge slots inside the console, and you're going to use it everywhere to clean up flux, to do all sorts of stuff. So isopropyl alcohol, you really need that stuff. Buy it wherever you can. You can get it anywhere. It's really easy to get. And of course, cotton buds or cotton tips, they might be called in your country. Just a packet like that from a pharmacy and you're good to go. So once you're inside the console, you've done a bit of that. You've obviously got a digital multimeter. You really need one of these. Typically on the DC volt range. I've been through this multimeter in the past. This is a very old one that I had when I learnt electronics in the 90s. But modern ones are auto-ranging, auto-sensing, kind of one-stop shop devices. I'll post a link to one I recommend today. The ones today are much more modern than mine. They're auto-sensing, auto-ranging. You basically just touch the probes to anything you want. It'll tell you the answer. So you can measure capacitance, obviously DC volts for inside a console, resistance, and you can test out your components and that sort of thing. So you need to get yourself a digital multimeter. And once again, you don't have to spend a fortune on these things. They're so cheap. And I'd just recommend a basic one. You really don't need to spend a fortune. So we're going to get onto the soldering stuff over there in a minute. I know you're eager to get onto that. I had this out on the bench. I don't really know why I brought this out, but this is a digital vernier sort of caliper. It's designed to measure very, very accurate measurements of things. I use this for all sorts of purposes, but I had it out on the bench. It's not really relevant to the topic we're talking about today, but it is a very handy tool to have for around about the $20 mark. That's it. $20 from China. These are extremely handy to have. So just a bit of an extra thing. The tools I use and the wire for modding. So obviously you need yourself a pair of flush cutters, and they're called flush cutters because the back side of them actually is flat and will snip things off on the board absolutely flat and not leave any protrusion. So get yourself a nice pair of flush cutters, and they're very different to things like pliers and side cutters. They're very different to all that. You need flush cutters. Some basic needle nose pliers. Now you can get standard needle nose that are not bent, but I quite like these bent ones because you can sort of get into places and manipulate wires and things very easily. You know, these came in a set of like 5 or something. I've already lost the spring, but you know, they're so handy, and they're basically a disposable item. Once that breaks, I'll just buy another set, and I think this set was like $15 or something. So once again, links to all this will be in the description. I'll get onto the wire in a second. You know, basic wire strippers. These are called parrot style. They grip the wire, pull it apart and strip it. They're sort of designed for thicker gauge wire, but they do work on the fine stuff. This style is all you really need. This particular one is ancient. It's all rusted, and I couldn't find my current one. I've just tidied things up and I've kind of lost it in the process. Very similar style. You just basically put the wire in and you can strip it off easily. You do need wire strippers. Once again, they're inexpensive, and I would recommend you pick up like a set. So to do mods and things, I like to use wrapping wire. This is a bit confusing, this label, but what the size that I like to get is AWG30. So this particular label is a bit confusing. It's got all sorts of measurements on it. So AWG stands for American Wire Gauge, and it's the measurement and the thickness of the wire. What's important though for modding is you really want a wire that's just one solid core. So try and aim to buy a wire that is just one core of the conductor and not multiple thinner wires that you twist up. They're okay. And they're good for other mods, and they're good for carrying a lot of current and power. But for the general mod you do, I'd recommend really fine wire like this, single core, point to point, and it's very clean and tidy. So something like that is all you really need. Okay, so onto the soldering equipment. This is probably the area of the video that you're most interested in. So I'll be quick, but I'll be a little bit detailed, and I'll go through what I've got. So I recently picked up this unit, which is a soldering iron with a holder, and it's a hot air gun all in one. It actually also does voltage, so you can, as a power supply, you can connect it and test or power your unit. You can test things, and it's quite handy. I don't really use that side of it that much. I've got my own power supplies for that, but it is a handy thing to have. But what's really good about this unit is it has a temperature controlled soldering iron. So first thing you need to understand is when you buy a soldering iron or a soldering iron, if you're in America, I don't know why you call it solder when it's based on a solid product. Anyway, moving on. Soldering equipment. These sort of basic soldering irons, the ones that plug directly into the wall, they're just one temperature set basically off your mains power, and you're going to be lucky to get kind of 10 watts out of it or something, and you don't know what the temperature is, you can't control it. I'd avoid those really cheap ones. What you want is a soldering station that has a digital temperature control. Something like this is fine. This whole unit is about $100 or less these days, so it's very inexpensive. So I like to solder at around 390 degrees Celsius, but if I'm doing work that requires more heat in it, or it's difficult to desolder, you know, I'll just pump the temperature up and the iron will heat up to that sort of temperature. So that's the benefit of having a digital controlled soldering iron, is you can just control the temperature yourself. So I'd recommend that. This particular one is the 853D, the YIHUA, so however you say that. I'll post a link to this one again, but this is the unit I have. And the hot air gun is sort of simpler, so you switch that on. 380 is also a really good temperature for hot air. So just remember 380. You can definitely go a lot higher on the iron, but for air, you know, 380 is pretty good as well. It lives in a holder, and when you pick it up, a fan will start spinning, the temperature will regulate, and there's a dial here to adjust the airflow, the amount of air that comes out of this thing. So I'll just turn that down. So these things are really handy if you want to remove like surface mount components, like little ICs that are quite delicate. You just need to heat them obviously gently with a hot air gun, circulate it around, and the solder will melt and you can lift it off with your pair of tweezers. So that's what they're for. They're for removing delicate chips that you can't really do with a soldering iron because there's just too many points to desolder at once. So this unit, soldering iron, hot air gun, temperature controlled, airflow controlled, and the power sort of side of things, which is cool. It's like $100 unit. That's Australian. So in US dollars, you're probably talking $75 US or something. Shipped as well. Insane value. I'll post a link to where to buy this one or something similar. I'd recommend you pick something like that up. On the topic of the actual iron, just make sure you get one with replaceable tips. So this is hot, so I can't touch it now. Unscrew that casing, and the shield will come off, and the tip can just be replaced with all sorts of different style tips. I've actually got the box that came with it. So yeah, there you go. So all sorts of style tips, chisel tips and all that sort of stuff, and different shaped ones for doing different sort of work. So I won't get into all that sort of stuff on this video, but there's already plenty of good videos out there to learn about how to solder, which tips to use, and the techniques. But basically, it's just keep it simple, guys. Apply heat, apply solder, join the connection together. If it looks shiny, it's generally pretty good. If it looks dull, it wasn't done properly, and you probably need to do it again. It's pretty much all there is to it. There is obviously a lot more, and you're probably going to drop comments now, but I was taught to look for a shiny joint. So that's one of the main things to look for. Get things hot, apply solder, job's done. The hot air gun also comes with different shaped attachments. So that was actually pretty cool. You get all that for not much money. It's pretty good value. This thing sitting on top, that actually didn't come with it. This gold colored thing is a Chinese thing from AliExpress. So what I did is it's basically just a brass filled little housing. It's a metal housing. I got a metal one, not plastic. You know, obvious reasons. Metal's just going to be more heat tolerant. You basically just put your soldering iron in when it's dirty, like this, and keep it clean. It just cleans the tip off, and that's a pretty good way of doing it, I think. You can use a sponge down here as well, in the tray, down in there, but you know, the sponges get pretty dirty, and I prefer to use one of these things. And all I did is I just drilled a hole, mounted the base to the top of this unit, and then that sits in the top like that. And it's all just one convenient unit that I can just pick up, do work with, clean it off, and put it back in. So that's how I sort of like to use that. We'll get on to the desoldering gun in a minute, but you know, on the topic of products and what I use, look, the solder itself, you know, these days you can buy all sorts of stuff with flux cores and all that sort of stuff, and I just stick to something pretty basic, 1mm gauge, and I still use some of the old-fashioned stuff with lead in it. Now I know that's probably not a good idea. I'm actually starting to switch away from lead, but lead makes things easier to work with. It melts at a lower temperature and it just flows, and it actually works pretty damn well. But the lead-free stuff also works well. You just need to probably practice using it. I know Europe has banned leaded solder, so it's time to move away from this stuff. So I probably wouldn't recommend buying it. Try the lead-free stuff first and see how you go. What is important to note though, when I use this stuff, I have a fan running to my left over this way, and I blow fresh air right across the desk, and I have the doors and everything open and windows open, and I let a lot of air ventilate through the room. So I really don't take the risk. I use the stuff, but I ventilate a lot of airflow around me to reduce the inhalation of lead. Some solder wick is also really handy. I'd recommend something like this. This is just a Hakko product. There's so many different types of wick out there, but really it's all similar stuff. Just trial and error and see what you like. But you buy a brand like that that's going to work, and it just works. It's a pretty trustworthy brand. Flux is one of those things. I used to have big containers of no clean flux, and they're very good. You can just drop a cap full of the stuff on the work area and solder right through it, and it just produces far greater results. So always use flux is a recommendation. But I've got just no clean flux in a pen, and you just dab this stuff on, and it seems to be enough to get the job done. I don't get too carried away with flux. The basic stuff seems to work very well. So, the internet will probably complain and you want to have your opinions, and that's all fine. There are better fluxes out there. The liquid stuff is pretty good. This is liquid in a pen, so it's easy to dispense. So just use flux. Something in general is better than nothing. We'll move that aside. Might actually turn that off. So this guy over here is the desoldering gun. Now, I've just plugged it in to warm it up. While this is a very good unit, actually, it actually functions very well and it's very inexpensive, there are a few trade-offs. So as you can see in the sort of background, it doesn't have a power switch, so you got to manually just plug it in. So that's a little bit annoying. I might wire in my own switch into that. But it has a temperature gauge here on the side where you can just set the temperature. Mine's set to about 400 degrees Celsius right now. It's probably a bit hot. I should probably turn that down a little bit. And basically what these things do is it's a vacuum. There's a pump and an air vacuum inside the unit and a hot tip, which is hollow. So you put it on the joint, it melts the solder, you pull the trigger, and it vacuums out the liquid solder, and you're left with a nice clean joint. And things like chips will just fall out, the components will just come right out, like through-hole components. So it's designed for desoldering through-hole stuff, not surface mount. And to maintain these, all you do is you sort of pull back the chamber, shake out the solder that builds up inside, make sure the air filters still look good, and put it back in. It's all spring loaded. It's really simple. There's not a lot going on with these things. This particular model is the S993A from China, obviously. But something to note, this one only runs on 220 volts, 220, 230 volts AC. So if you're in America, this won't work for you. Things will just, it won't get very hot, and the pump will run at half speed. So if you listen to mine, that's the speed it should operate. I've actually seen some review videos on YouTube where Americans test this exact gun and they say it doesn't perform well. Well, it's because they're running it off 110 volts in America and it just runs at half speed. So I thought that was a bit silly, actually. So make sure when you buy these, you get the one that matches your country's power. So the whole world is pretty much 240 or 230, 240 volts, except America, which is 110, 120, and Japan, which is about 100 volts AC. I don't know about Canada. Canada's probably 110 as well. But most of the world is the higher voltage range. And So just be careful. Just get the one that suits your country. Otherwise, you're going to run into performance problems. And just, you know, be careful of those reviews you watch, because sometimes they're not aware of that stuff and they try to review a product that's just not designed for their country. So get the right one for you, and it's just that simple. I'll post a link in the description of where I picked this up. This was also very inexpensive, around the $100 mark Aussie. So that's, you know, 75 US. And this thing performs so bloody well. This is amazing gun. For a cheap unit, this thing would suck the basketball through a garden hose. It's got a lot of vacuuming power. It gets really hot. And it comes with a holder. It comes with a sponge and everything to clean it off if you want to. It is very good. I can't really say a bad thing about that, except it hasn't got a power switch here on the cord, and it doesn't come with other nozzles. It only comes with that one little nozzle on the front, which was, I think, 0.8 millimeter. So it's quite small, but something to be aware of. You know, they had to cut costs somewhere, and that seems to be what they've done. I look at this sort of unit as disposable. I'm going to use it until it breaks. I'll just chuck it out and buy another one. So, you know, you might think that's a bit wasteful, but, you know, I don't know getting parts for this will be that easy. If I could find parts, yeah, sure, I'd buy them and fix it. But something to be aware of, these cheaper Chinese ones are a disposable design. So just keep that in mind, where a good quality piece of equipment is more replaceable and upgradable and so forth. And the last piece of equipment on my bench here is an oscilloscope. So this is just a basic Rigol DS1052E. This is a 50 megahertz oscilloscope, but the good thing about this particular model is you can flash it with the firmware from another model, which makes it a 100 megahertz oscilloscope. So yeah, believe it or not, it's just the firmware that varied on this model and one above it. The price point was like $100 or something, difference between the two models. But you buy the cheaper one, you download the firmware, you flash the firmware onto it by that USB port at the front, and you've got a faster 100 megahertz oscilloscope, which is pretty damn good. You know, that's more than enough for the stuff we're going to do in retro gaming. In fact, I don't really use it that much, but it's good to have. It just boots up. It's fully digital. So there's automatic ranges and everything, and you just basically get your probe and put your probe on what you're measuring, and you're good to go. So I won't get into the details of that today, but yeah, it's a great unit, very accurate results, and it saved me a few times just to clarify doubts of something. So I'd recommend one of those, but not necessarily straight away. You really don't need that to begin with. That's more of an intermediate product to have. So I'll post a link as usual, but yeah, you don't really need that today. The final couple of things that you've probably seen in the edge of the camera there are just things like these. So this is, you know, the final sort of things I use, and I'll just quickly talk about. A basic painter's paintbrush. Just get a nice big one. This is just a huge one. Soft bristles. Keep it clean and dry. Don't ever use this for paint. And I use that to clean circuit boards. So you have a circuit board that's full of dust, or a console, this works so well. You just brush it on, it'll get all the dust and junk and dead bugs out of a console very, very well. So, you know, it's like a $1 item from a hardware store. Very handy for cleaning. This sort of alligator clip holder device, you can pick up these anywhere as well. Make sure it's got a nice heavy base on it so it doesn't tip over. Also holds screws and components for you. You know, it's fully adjustable. You can angle these any which way you like. It's really handy. You basically just put your component in, whatever you're doing, and you can hold something and solder in position. It's really, really handy. It's an extra set of hands, basically. Put your wire in there, for example, soldering iron, and you're good to go. I'd recommend one of these. They're just probably about $10. They come with a magnifying glass as well. That's just up on my other bench. Magnifying glass is very handy looking at things as well. So for $10, that is a great pickup. Second last thing, not finally, this is a small component tester. So these are also China specials. This particular one is the GM328A version 1.11. There are probably better, more modern versions out there by now, but basically you plug in a 9-volt battery, no calibration, no setup really required. Generally, you can calibrate them back to 0 by touching, like say, the test points together. So you join points 1 and 2 together when you turn it on. It'll force a calibration, but generally you just put in a component like a capacitor or something into your test pins, lock it down. You know, you can touch it to these pins instead. You can even plug a connector on the side. They're all the same pins. They come in different orders, so you can use 3-legged components and stuff like transistors, and basically just push test. It turns it on. It's testing. See for capacitance, and there you go. It's detected between pins 1 and 3. It's got capacitance of 2170 microfarads, a little bit of a loss, and a very low ESR, which is the resistance, equivalent series resistance. You always want to look for low ESR on capacitors and make sure the capacitance measured is very similar to what it's meant to be. So that one was a 2200 microfarad at 25 volts. So yeah, we were pretty much spot on. We were very good. 2199 that time. So these little $5 testers, it's something I would recommend you pick up if you pull caps and things out and you're not sure if they're working. This will tell you if the cap was good or not, so you know what you did made a difference. Moving on further from that topic, you do have the option to have a ESR meter. This is something I've got in my toolkit. I use it occasionally. It does the same thing as measuring capacitance, but it measures it in circuit. So the capacitor is still in the board. You basically just put 2 probes on the capacitor, probes, or these pinch things, and just pinch either side of the capacitor, and it'll tell you if the capacitor is good or not. It won't necessarily give you the capacitance of like 2200 microfarad, the rating, but it'll tell you if it's good or not. Something I forgot to show you earlier in the tools was this basic right-angled pick sort of tool. It's very handy for fixing cart slots and that sort of thing. So, you know, try and pick one of them up and put it in your toolbox. So we're pretty much wrapped up. One more thing which I forgot to show you was it's a lamp and a microscope I also use occasionally. It's a bit hard to film this thing, but it's just a clip-on lamp that'll clip onto the bench. It'll stand up high, and this is a nice light source here, which you can put directly over your work. It's powered via USB, so it's very basic. And this one is a digital microscope, which I've just cable tied on. So I've got light, I've got microscope. The board would sit there, and you can feed the USB signal of the microscope straight into your monitor, or like your PC basically, put it into a laptop or whatever, and you can see what you're looking at in really high detail, which helps a lot. So, you know, this light I bought for $10 at Kmart, and the microscope I bought from China. Obviously I'll post links again, but great little tools to put in your toolkit. Light is an underrated thing when you're working on, you know, close circuits. The final thing is plastic conditioner I use. So when the job's all said and done, you want to make the product and the console plastic look really good. I use Viewplex and a microfiber cloth. That's it. Obviously I'll wash all the plastics in a laundry or something, get them nice and clean, dry them off, and condition them with this stuff. It's what the airlines use. Pretty much all the airlines will use this product. Very common. It smells like sort of oranges, and it's anti-static, so it repels dust. That's it, guys. I hope you learned something today, or it's not really a learning video, was it? It was just a showcase video. I'll post the links to the pile of stuff in the description and pick that up if you want. I guess the main point of the story today was that you don't have to spend a lot of money. Very inexpensive hobby to get into. So good luck with everything, guys. Let me know what you buy. Post it in the comments. Tell me what you've picked up. Tell me what you don't like. Like, share, comment, pass the video around, all that good stuff. And I'll see you on the next one. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.